Hello, and thank you for stopping in to visit us here at the Community of Practice. I'm going to talk a little bit about scope today, but before I do that, I want to say a little bit about, myself and how I fit into this whole picture. So, in the 4 decades that I spent in the O&M facility world, I've been involved with all aspects of expansions and commissionings and turnarounds and day-to-day operation and day-to-day maintenance. And I see things repeatedly happening, and they've all that's changed is my point of view over the years, where I'm seeing it from. But after a while, you begin to realize you're seeing the same things you've always seen. You just understand them perhaps a little bit better than when you were 22. And one of the things I see when it comes to program success is programs fail when leadership accountability fails. I've worked for companies that implemented programs that at the time we all thought were genuinely impossible to make happen. But we had leadership at the time that was committed to what they said they would do, and therefore it did happen. And at many other times in my career, that isn't how it's gone. Programs roll out, and that's the last time the leadership team looks at them. Until a few years down the road when they're reviewed and declared failures. Well, all this ties in with today's talk about scope, because scope and the understanding of scope is one of the biggest contributing failure mechanisms to anybody's turnaround. And I think a lot of that comes from a lack of leadership accountability. I mean, I could take the easy way out and say that it comes from a lack of worker initiative and stems from worker laziness. I could do that. I've certainly heard many other people over the course of my life take that approach. But that isn't actually what I believe is happening. I believe the workforce is the workforce. And, if you're really super interested in the drivers of that, then, you'd be studying workplace psychology and coming to that better understanding. Anyway, how does it all tie in with our talk about scope? Well, it's quite simply this, is, do you understand, does anybody out there understand who owns scope? Who is accountable for scope? And before we even start to answer the question, if you're thinking it has anything to do with the turnaround team, it does not. The turnaround team is not accountable for scope development. Scope is something that we should be given, and we would then develop plans and schedules and contact contractors and develop a contracting strategy, all towards executing this on your behalf, this scope volume that you've handed us, with excellence. But the turnaround team's job doesn't start with going out and getting their own scope. That doesn't even make any sense when you think about it. Operations own scope, and scope development is 100% an operations accountability. I could scream it from the rooftops. There's nothing anybody can say that's going to change this. You got to think about it for a second. It's operations owns the facility. Operations is accountable for the equipment. Operations, it's their house. Me, your turnaround manager, think of me like a fox. And my planners and specialized schedulers, the team that I bring to the table, we're all foxes. And your facility is the hen house. And if you're just going to hand us the hen house and the keys to the engineering files and tell us to turn the facility around for you, then you need to understand that we're going to turn around everything. That we're going to do exactly what you would expect a fox in a hen house to do. We're going to do it all. And I don't know anybody that's really got that kind of budget. It's not us that's going to make a call, though. You're not ever going to be calling me and my team out for not having executed work, when you didn't weigh in on it. So why is it that virtually every operations team that I've ever worked with, and I've talked to a lot of other people in this business, and my experiences, I'm absolutely certain, are not in the least unique. It's just a thing. But there's no real mystery to it. And we did touch on it earlier, because it is basically true that people are, when they can get away with it, lazy. Scope development is a huge amount of work. And it is stressful as anything, because, you've got somebody in one ear yelling at you about how much money there is, and other people telling you about how the facility's got to run clean for 4 years. And you don't want to be the person that cancels the work that takes the facility down 6 weeks later. And you also don't want to be the person that hands the keys to the foxes, right? Everyone on our team is always sympathetic to the trials and tribulations of scope collection, but honestly, surely people are getting my point here, that regardless of how it's been done all the time, and regardless of what you're used to, the very idea that your turnaround team is in charge of scope, it's just never going to work for you. It's just not. That being said, in this day and age, scope collection should not be the big deal it is. And your work management people shouldn't really need to be driven with the crack of a whip to get you there. But they might have to be persuaded to understand that you're quite serious about this. I guess I should qualify. I'm only really talking to people that are using like some kind of modern CMMS system, whether it's SAP or whatever. You can argue forever about the trials and tribulations of the burden that you're under with your particular CMMS system, but they're all more or less the same, and they'll all do a huge job for you if you just give them a chance. But it starts with the inputs. Your work management team, they're the inputs. So if we go back and remember, I've talked more than once, but I think we talked even just last week about the long-range plan. So assuming that you developed a proper long-range plan, then the whole world, especially if you really understood my advice from before, that secret plans, they not only don't gain you anything, they potentially close the door to things that could have really helped you. So you had a long-range plan, and you've published your long-range plan. And so my question then becomes, what have your integrity people been doing? Because they should be writing work orders for all of their identified work. as well, both the work that's driven by the inspection schedule and the work that's driven out of the previous inspection. Who else would be accountable for writing those orders? And if somehow that department has that prima donna status and gets to claim that they don't write work orders, then you're going to have to assign somebody from work management to do it, because this needs to be getting done immediately following your last outage. So this needs to be in your scope already. It's in the CMMS system. You have a long-range plan. Your work management team should be taking that work and putting it into that long-range plan. There's no reason for anybody to pretend they don't know when the window is anymore, because senior leadership committed to a long-range plan and is now being accountable for making sure the long-range plan is there and is well published. So everything you need to start calling people out is there. And I'm just going to talk that way. I don't care whether it's polite or not. Sometimes it's necessary to start calling people out. Likewise with your projects and your field engineering teams. Again, two teams that so many of us have had experience with them saying outright, we don't write work orders. Well, you know what? If you're leadership in a facility like that and you accept that, and engineering it gets to have that status, that's fine. I'm through with trying to tell leaders what they should and shouldn't be doing. But if you are going to do that, then you're going to have to assign somebody on the work management team to do the work for your project managers and your engineers, since apparently they don't have to do their own work. Right? It's just that simple. If you get this part all right, if you've got a long range plan, if leadership's stepping up and holding the integrity department to do their job, and if they're stepping up and holding projects and field engineering to do their job, 80% of your turnaround work is already in your SAP or your CMMS system and will already be properly coded, so it can just be pulled out of the system. The other 20%, which in a brand new facility might be less, and in an older facility might be a little bit more, is representative of the work that comes out of the work orders written on a day-to-day ongoing basis by your O&M team, your operators and your in-house maintenance teams. Here's where I don't ever see anybody push back. Everybody understands that the operators and the in-house maintenance are accountable for writing their own work orders. I only ever see that pushback up in these upper guys here. That I don't see it from the actual workforce. But here's the thing with those work orders. They need to be managed, and they need to be managed properly as to the systems. They need to be processed upon receipt. The notification bin, if you want to call it, in your SAP system isn't a holding zone, right? You're not utilizing your CMMS system properly if you're doing that. Every single day between your O&M supervision staff and your work management team, every order generated in the last 24 hours should be fully processed, and a decision should be made. Are we going to shut the plant down right now and do this work? Are we going to do this work as break-in work to this week? Does this work require a total outage? Does this work require a unit outage? And remember here, the long-range plan, if you've answered those questions at your morning notification meeting or however you do it, then why 2 years later would they not generate out in the proper sort code back to your long-range plan? Because at that point, if they don't, if supervision has done their job and made sure that those approvals were in place and that those orders were reviewed, then we need to start questioning, what is the work management team doing? Right? And And again, if leadership's not going to be accountable to seeing that their will is done, then you're only getting the work done mostly by the people who are really driven. And that's not going to be the way to do an outage. Here's the thing I've seen with this work. Now remember, we're only talking about 20%. If it's properly done, it's only 20% of the work that you're going to complete during the turnaround. But I've seen that as a stack of computer printout 4 inches high with years and years of maintenance backlog. Here, sort this out and let us know what work is part of turnaround scope. No, that's not our job. And we're not going to do it. We can't do it. It doesn't even make any sense. Yes, we, the turnaround team that you bring in, should facilitate scope scrub. I'm just going to, I know you've all heard that term. I know some of you are saying, no, that is your job. That is your scope scrub. Isn't when you give me 4,000 outdated work orders from a 10-year maintenance backlog and ask my team to somehow go through and decide, what you want to work on and what you don't work on. What I'm looking at here is a lack of responsibility and accountability from years and years of your supervision and management team. I can't now, and nobody on my team can now come up with prioritizations for work that you've ignored for all this time. One of the things that needs to be understood about having a functional turnaround team and a functional turnaround process is the turnaround team and process are not a dumping ground, and they cannot be a dumping ground. And it doesn't even make sense that you would want them to be a dumping ground, because without question, the most expensive time to do work is during turnaround. So getting all this stuff right on a day by day by day basis is not really that difficult. This is not heavy lifting. It becomes heavy lifting when 8 months before or 6 months before, God, in my 40 decades, I've seen it be 3 months before. Suddenly you come up with this huge stack of maintenance backlog and you want somebody else to go and make sense of it. You have a team that has day-to-day accountability for that. Whether you call them your work management team or your maintenance planning team, whatever you call them, they are the ones in the operations group who are accountable for understanding, quantifying, and into the base schedule of the long-range plan, placing scope. That's the only way it can ever be. Once we do get into play, and once we do get a viable scope package, then comes scope control. And again, this isn't trying to get it. This is respecting who owns the scope, whose job we're working on here. This isn't about trying to push back anything. You have to have added work tracking and approval, right? Because here's the simple thing. If I don't have an added work tracking and approval system that I'm getting sign off on a regular basis from the facility leadership team, then basically everybody on plant site can just slip in whatever they want, and what control would I have as the turnaround manager? I'd have no control. Same with found work tracking and approval. Unfortunately, out of 4 decades, for myself, I haven't ever actually worked in what I'd call a new facility. So found work has always been a huge, huge part of any turnaround that I've been involved in, from the time I was the one crawling through towers with a wire brush in my hand to my last years where I was managing the events. Likewise, remove work tracking and approval. And man, people don't like this one and they don't understand it. But here's what's going to happen if some work gets removed and it leads to an unscheduled 6-week shutdown 6 months down the road. Somebody's head's got to roll, right? And And it's not a very clever turnaround manager that allows work to be removed from a schedule without sign-off. So it's not about being a cop. It's about holding people to their accountabilities. And the people scope control is holding to their accountabilities is the facility leadership team. And shockingly enough, in my experience, the facility leadership team seldom likes to have their toes held to this particular fire. But unless you want to be known as foolish scapegoat number one, it's best to have a scope control process. Scope control approval accountabilities are a leading cause of schedule breakdown during executions. They are. Ask anybody that's actually been involved in the work. Don't ask people that sit in office towers in downtown Calgary and Toronto. Ask people who are actually involved in the work. Right? It's you find a job on a Monday morning and you can't get the facility manager to sit down for 7 seconds and sign off on that work until Friday. And now you can't get the materials to Monday. And now you can't make startup on time. It's just the truth. Execution excellence dictates that total outage is an all-in affair. And I see this, I've seen it over and over again. The facility operations management and leadership team, if they get in a position where they have a turnaround team, they kind of think that they're semi on vacation, and that's just not how it works, right? I can be out there at 4:30 in the morning making sure I understand what my scope control asks for the day are going to be first thing in the morning. But when that facility manager arrives, whenever he gets around to it at 8 o'clock or whatever, he needs to make time for this. It's important, and it needs to be done now. Respect for the scope control process demands full participation from management and leadership. And the reason that I'm talking about it here and now is because in 4 decades, from the juniorest junior operator up to, as I've said, event manager, I never stopped seeing this, right? Like, how come we're not moving on this thing? Oh, well, the manager hasn't signed off on it yet. Well, why hasn't he signed? Oh, he's too busy. How can anybody be too busy to do anything else but turnaround during turnaround? If that is true, then the person in the leadership role doesn't even understand what a turnaround is. Thank you very much for your time. I'm glad to contribute in whatever way that I still can. Have a nice day.